The phone rang just as I finished washing my lunch dishes. The shrill tone cut through the afternoon silence of my empty house. A sound so unfamiliar, it made me jump. My hands were still damp when I reached for it, my heart kicking when I saw Brandon's name on the screen. 2 months, 2 months of silence that felt like a lifetime. Mom. His voice was different, warmer than I remembered. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Brandon, honey. I couldn't hide the tremor of excitement in my voice. You're never interrupting. It's so good to hear you. He laughed, a light sound that felt rehearsed, practiced. I have a surprise for you, he said. We're coming over tonight, Jessica and I, along with her parents. The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. My accountant's mind, always calculating, started spinning. Tonight, the whole family. That's wonderful. I managed. I haven't seen you in so long. Should I make dinner? I could pick up that wine you like. The Pinot Noir from that little vineyard we visited. Don't worry about food, Mom. His tone became firmer. All business. Just be ready for us, around 7. This is important. Something in his voice gave me pause, a cold edge that didn't match the warm tone he'd started with, but the gaping loneliness of the past few months shouted it down. This was it. The reconciliation I'd been praying for. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice warm again. I'll make sure everything's perfect. Will you be staying the night? I can prepare the guest rooms. We'll see how the evening goes. He cut me off gently. I have to run now, but we'll see you at 7 sharp, okay? The line went dead before I could ask anything else. I stood there, phone in hand, replaying his words. A surprise, a conversation. It sounded so formal, so strangely corporate, but maybe this was his way of bridging the gap that had grown between us since his father died. Maybe this was the beginning of things getting better. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from, or what time it is for you. I glanced at my watch. Just over 4 hours to prepare. The house, which moments before had felt like a tomb, was suddenly alive with possibility. I walked through each room with a renewed sense of purpose, seeing it all through Brandon's critical eyes. The living room needed vacuuming, the bathroom fresh towels. I moved with the systematic precision that had served me well through 40 years of accounting work. First, the grocery store on Lincoln Avenue. The crisp March air bit at my cheeks, a promise of spring still holding on to winter's edge. I found a bouquet of bright yellow daffodils, his favorite since he was a little boy, and a bottle of the Pinot Noir he'd mentioned loving last Christmas. In the bakery section, I found individual chocolate tarts, the kind he used to beg for when we spent Saturdays at Anderson's bookstore. Back home, I arranged the flowers in my husband's crystal vase, the one Brandon always said he wanted someday. The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, making them glow like small suns. I set the dining room table with our good china, the set we'd bought for special occasions that had become far too rare. While wiping down the counters, I found myself humming a simple tune I hadn't thought of in months. I pulled out the old photo albums, thinking we could look through them together, a bridge to a time when things were simpler. There was Brandon, at 5, gap-toothed and grinning in a yellow shirt. Brandon, at 16, rolling his eyes at my camera, but smiling, despite himself. Brandon on his wedding day, handsome. I paused at that last photo. Jessica stood beside him, beautiful enough in her rented dress, but her smile had always seemed hollow to me. Her parents flanked them, Thomas with his practiced businessman's grin, Patricia with her perpetual look of mild disapproval. They'd never quite accepted me, the simple accountant who'd worked her way up from nothing. But tonight would be different. Tonight, we were family. At 6:30, after showering and putting on the blue blouse David said brought out my eyes, I did a final walkthrough. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh flowers. The wine was breathing on the sideboard. The chocolate tarts waited on delicate bone china plates. Everything was ready. I settled into my favorite chair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on in the gathering dusk. The anticipation delicious and sharp. The slam of car doors shattered the quiet street. I smoothed my hair in the hallway mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw 4 silhouettes approaching. I pulled the door open before they could knock. A wide, welcoming smile stretched across my face. Brandon, Jessica, come in, come in. My smile faltered. Brandon stood on the doorstep wrapped in a severe black coat, his face a mask of cold composure. There was no smile, no hug, just a flat, hello mom. His voice was stripped of the warmth from our phone call. Before I could respond, Jessica pushed past him, a wave of stale alcohol washing over me. Her eyes were bloodshot, her jaw set in an aggressive line. Behind them, Thomas and Patricia Hayes flanked the doorway like a pair of expensive vultures. "Come in," I repeated, my voice weaker now. "I opened that wine you love." "We won't be staying for dinner," Patricia Hayes announced, sweeping into my living room as if she owned it. Her eyes catalogued every piece of furniture, every photograph. She ran a dismissive finger over David's crystal vase. "Such cheap flowers." I blinked, confused. "They're daffodils. I bought them because they're Brandon's favorites." "Mom, we need to talk." Brandon finally looked at me, but his eyes were as cold as January rain. "Sit down." My gaze drifted to Thomas Hayes. He had his phone out and was methodically photographing my kitchen, my dining room, the camera shutter clicking like a tiny, menacing clock. "What's he doing?" I asked, bewildered. "Assessing the property value," Patricia said, settling into my husband's favorite armchair. Patricia looked directly at me, her expression a mixture of triumph and disdain. "My daughter's family is going to live here now, so get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. I gripped the back of the sofa to steady myself. "What? I don't understand." "Where? This is my house. I've lived here for 30 years. Brandon's voice cut through my disbelief like a shard of ice. "Go to the dump if you want. We need this house." Jessica stepped closer, her breath sharp with whiskey. "We already arranged things with the police," she sneered. "Don't make trouble." I stared at my son, searching his face for any trace of the child I'd raised. There was nothing. He looked at me like I was a stranger, an obstacle to be removed. "Brandon's sweetheart, what is this about?" I pleaded. "Is this about money? If you need help, you're leaving tonight." Patricia's voice was final. "We'll give you 1 hour to pack your essentials." My legs gave out and I sank into the sofa. My eyes fell on the dining table, on the untouched chocolate tarts, and the wine breathing uselessly in its decanter. The hope I'd so carefully constructed now seemed like a cruel joke. "This is my home," I whispered. Thomas slipped his phone into his pocket, his photography complete. "Not anymore," he said smoothly. "Brandon is our family takes care of family." The irony was suffocating. I looked at the four of them, invaders standing in the heart of the life I'd built with David, and then something inside me shifted. The hurt, the confusion, it all receded, replaced by something cold, hard, and sharp. "Calculation, all right," I said quietly. The room fell silent. They had expected tears, pleading, rage. Instead, they got quiet compliance. Patricia's eyebrows rose in surprise. Jessica's aggressive posture faltered. I stood up, my movements steady and deliberate, and walked to the hall closet. I pulled out my old leather briefcase. "I'll pack some things." I went into my bedroom and pulled my worn suitcase from the closet shelf. The leather was cracked, but the latches still worked perfectly. Everything had its purpose, its proper place. "All right, I'll go," I said again, my voice calm and measured. They stared at me from the living room. "But remember," I added, looking directly at Brandon, "I've been an accountant my whole life. I know how to build things." I paused, folding a blouse with mechanical precision. "I also know how to tear them down." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean by that?" "Nothing, son," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. "Just wishing you happiness in your new home." From the living room, Patricia's sharp voice carried victorious, finally, showing some sense. I ignored her. I packed methodically. Bank statements from the filing cabinet, insurance papers, the deed to the house, my accounting certifications and professional references, 40 years of careful documentation. I packed David's photograph last, the one from our anniversary dinner. His smile radiated a warmth that felt impossible in this cold, hostile house. 20 minutes, that's all it took to pack up a lifetime. I wheeled the suitcase through the living room. They watched me like vultures, waiting for their prey to finally die. Thomas had resumed his photography, now focusing on the more expensive pieces of furniture. Patricia was already rearranging throw pillows on David's favorite chair. "The utilities are in my name," I said quietly. "You'll need to transfer them." "We'll handle everything," Thomas replied without looking up. I paused at the front door, my hand on the knob. "Well then," I said, my grip tightening on the suitcase handle, "I suppose this is goodbye." None of them responded. The cold March air was a sharp slap against my face, clearing my head. This wasn't an escape, it was a tactical retreat. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk of my old Honda and drove away without a backward glance. I drove past the school where I dropped Brandon off every morning, past the park where we'd celebrated his graduation. The memories no longer brought warmth, only a cold, hard resolve. My first stop was an ATM, The screen glowed harshly in the dark parking lot. I checked my balances with steady fingers. Pension deposits, Social Security, savings accumulated over decades of careful living. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than they knew. It was enough. 15 minutes later, I was at the Maple Grove Inn, a budget motel on a commercial strip. The desk clerk processed my registration with bored indifference. I paid cash for 3 nights. Room 237 smelled of industrial carpet cleaner, but it was clean and anonymous. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, opened my briefcase, and pulled out my laptop. The problem had been defined. It was time to engineer a solution. Morning light, thin and gray, filtered through the motel's cheap curtains. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the memory of the previous night crashed down on me. I pushed it aside. There was no time for grief, only for action. By 9:30, I was in tech. I need a prepaid phone, I told the young clerk with purple hair. Something basic and a cheap laptop for travel. Setting up a home office, she asked, ringing up the purchase. Remote work, I replied. Consulting. I paid in cash. No credit cards, no digital trail linking back to Barbara Mitchell. My next stop was a real estate office on Michigan Avenue. A bright, professional man named James Cooper looked up from his computer. I need a modest apartment, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. 1 bedroom, month-to-month lease. Good internet is essential. Budget range, he asked, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I named a figure that made his smile widen. It was comfortable, not extravagant, the kind of tenant landlords preferred. 2 hours later, I was signing a lease for a clean, empty 1-bedroom apartment 12 blocks from my former home, close enough for reconnaissance, far enough to avoid accidental encounters. The apartment smelled of fresh paint. Empty rooms echoed with possibility. I set my old suitcase in the bedroom and my new laptop on the kitchen counter. This was my new command center. I began making lists, resources available, timeline requirements, information needed. I created 4 manila folders, labeling each with a name: Brandon, Jessica, Thomas, Patricia. Phase 1, Intelligence Gathering. Thursday evening found me at the lakefront casino, nursing a ginger ale at the bar. The air was thick with smoke and desperation. The bartender, a chatty man named Marcus, kept the conversation flowing. That woman, Jessica, over there, I said, nodding towards the blackjack tables where my daughter-in-law was hunched over her cards. She comes in here often. Oh yeah, Marcus said, his eyes following my gaze. Lost quite a bit these past few weeks. Keep saying she'll pay up soon when she sells a house. I sipped my drink, watching Jessica's gestures grow more desperate as her pile of chips dwindled. Sounds like she's confident about that sale. Marcus lowered his voice. Hope so for her sake. Some of the guys she owes money to don't like waiting, if you know what I mean. When Jessica finally stumbled away from the table, her face flushed with alcohol and frustration, I was ready. From across the room, I lifted my new camera, the zoom lens bringing her defeated expression into sharp focus. I took clear shots of her condition, her behavior, her companions, evidence. Friday morning, I followed Jessica to her construction site downtown. She worked for Henderson Development, a mid-sized company that prided itself on its family-friendly image. At 11:30, she emerged for an extended lunch break. She wasn't alone. The man was in his early 30s with dark hair and a tailored business suit that screamed money. They walked close together, her hand resting on the small of his back, with an easy intimacy. From across the street, I photographed them. I captured their body language, his hand on her arm, the quick, hungry kiss he gave her before they parted ways at his expensive car. More evidence. That afternoon, I visited the Cook County Clerk's office. Public records are a beautiful thing. They laid out the full scope of Thomas Hayes's financial catastrophe with cold clinical precision. A failed investment in a restaurant chain, tax liens totaling over $40,000, a business license that had been suspended for non-payment of state fees. The Hayes family wasn't just desperate, they were drowning. Back in my apartment that evening, I spread the photographs and documents across my kitchen table. Jessica's gambling debts and her affair, Thomas's tax troubles, Patricia's complete dependence on her husband's failing income. Each folder now contained enough ammunition to completely destroy its subject. The foundation of their victory over me was riddled with structural weaknesses. Thomas Hayes was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. He hired a low-level private investigator, a man more accustomed to insurance fraud than systematic revenge. It took the pie less than 2 days to find me. I saw him from my window. A gray sedan, a man trying too hard to look inconspicuous. I left the apartment deliberately, making a show of heading to the grocery store. I knew they would act fast. I was counting on it. They didn't disappoint. While I was gone, Jessica and Thomas forced the cheap lock on my apartment door. They were clumsy, brutish. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for leverage. They found my new laptop, my carefully organized files, my printed out evidence. They tore the place apart. The laptop was smashed on the kitchen floor. My papers were ripped to shreds and doused with a bottle of ketchup from the fridge. They overturned the single table, threw the mattress off the bed frame, and kicked a hole in the drywall for good measure. They wanted it to look like a random burglary. They wanted to send a message. I returned an hour later to chaos. The door hung crookedly on its hinges. My command center was a wreck. For a moment, I just stood there surveying the damage. The shredded documents, the shattered screen of the laptop, the sticky red mess on the floor. Everything was gone. My photos, my timelines, my plans. A hot white wave of fury washed over me. I picked up the broken leg of the kitchen chair and slammed it against the wall again and again until the plaster cracked and my arm ached. The physical violence was a release, a pressure valve. Then, as quickly as it came, the rage subsided, replaced by the familiar cold calm. They had destroyed my evidence, but they hadn't destroyed my memory. They had shown their hand. They were scared, and they had just made their biggest mistake. They thought they had disarmed me. In reality, they had just given me a reason to stop holding back. My prepaid phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello, is this Barbara? The voice was male, familiar. It's Marcus from the casino bar. I straightened up. Marcus, how did you get this number? You left your receipt on the bar the other night, he said. Your name was on it. I did some asking around. Not hard to find a woman whose daughter-in-law is bragging all over town about kicking her out of her own house. I stayed silent. Look, he continued, his voice lowering. Jessica was in here last night, drunk off her ass, celebrating. Said she taught the old lady a lesson. She owes me money, and she owes some other guys a lot more. I want to get paid. I figure you're my best shot. What are you offering? I asked. She was running her mouth near the cash cage. The security cameras got it all. Her, the guys she owes, everything. I can get you a copy of the footage for a finder fee. Of course, my mind raced. This was better than the photos they destroyed. This was video. This was undeniable. I'm listening. The next morning, armed with new resolve, I walked into the downtown branch of First National Bank. I sat across from the branch manager, Rachel Bennett, a woman I vaguely remembered from years ago. I need to modify the access permissions on this joint account, I told her, sliding the old paperwork across her desk. It was the account Brandon and I had opened when he was 16, his first checking account. My name was still listed as Kona. He'd probably forgotten it even existed. Rachel reviewed the documents. These modifications will take effect immediately, Mrs. Mitchell, she confirmed. You're establishing yourself as the primary account holder, with approval requirements for large withdrawals. Perfect, I said. Please notify me of any access attempts and set a daily withdrawal limit for the secondary account holder, let's say $200. She nodded, typing into the system. The first domino was pushed. My next stop was the public library. Using one of their computers, I drafted a detailed anonymous email to the Illinois Department of Revenue. I didn't have the physical documents anymore, but I had a perfect memory. I listed Thomas Hayes's business, the specific dates of his non-payment of state fees, the approximate amount of the tax liens. I laid it all out with the precision of an accounting blueprint. I pressed send. The second domino fell. The first notification from the bank arrived the next morning. An attempted withdrawal denied. Then another, and another. 7 failed attempts in 15 minutes. Then my old phone, the one with his number, started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, it's Brandon. His message began, his voice tight with confusion. There's some kind of problem with our account. The bank says you've restricted access. Please call me back. The second call was more desperate. Mom, where are you? I can't pay rent. My card was declined at the coffee shop in front of my coworkers. Whatever this is, we need to fix it now. That afternoon, my new listening device, a small bug I'd planted near their bedroom window during a late-night visit, picked up their frantic conversation. Mom's money is blocked. Brandon's voice was sharp with panic. How are we going to pay the mortgage? Stay calm, honey. Jessica slurred. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can sell something. This can't be a coincidence, he shot back. The bank says the primary account holder restricted it. That means Mom did this on purpose. With Marcus's help, I had the casino security footage. It was damning. I made 2 copies. One went into an envelope addressed to the Human Resources Department at Henderson Development. With it, I included a typed anonymous note about employee Jessica Miller's significant gambling debts and her close association with known loan sharks, posing a reputational risk to the company. At 11:30, my listening device picked up Jessica's panicked call to Brandon from the Henderson parking lot. "They fired me," she choked out. Just like that, someone sent them the casino tapes, information about my personal life. They said I was a risk to the company. "Jessica, we can barely afford groceries." Brandon shrieked, "How are we going to survive without your paycheck?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a courier at Brandon's office. The second package. Inside were a series of high-resolution still frames from my earlier surveillance showing Jessica and her dark-haired colleague in a series of compromising positions. 2 hours later, my device captured a very different kind of conversation. "I know about your affair, Jessica." Brandon's voice was deadly quiet. "I want a divorce. I want half of everything we have left." "Brandon, please let me explain," she begged. "It's not what it looks like. Photos don't lie, Jessica," he hissed. "You've been sneaking around while I've been trying to hold our family together." "I was desperate," she cried. "The gambling got out of hand after what we did to your mother." A long silence, then Jessica's voice, barely a whisper. "This can't all be a coincidence. First the money, then my job, now these photos. Someone is doing this to us. Who would even care enough to destroy us?" Brandon asked. Another silence. "Pregnant with dawning horror. Your mother," Jessica whispered. "We threw out a woman who spent 40 years learning how to solve problems methodically." They were panicking. Their next move was as clumsy as their break-in. A knock came at my apartment door. A police officer stood there, looking tired and skeptical. Behind him, in a patrol car, I could see Patricia Hayes, her face a mask of triumphant righteousness. "Mrs. Mitchell, we received a complaint. The Hayes family says you've been threatening them." I opened the door wider. "I haven't broken any laws, officer. I'm simply protecting my legal rights." I had already consulted with an attorney, Lisa Morgan. I handed the officer the folder containing my bank correspondence and a letter from Morgan's office. The officer scanned the documents, his expression shifting from professional concern to mild annoyance. 20 minutes later, he was walking back to his car, leaving a sputtering Patricia Hayes in his wake. No evidence of criminal activity, no basis for a restraining order. Her attempt to use the law as a weapon had failed. Victory felt empty. I had them. They were broken financially and emotionally, but the satisfaction I expected wasn't there. While organizing my new files, I found an old manila envelope I'd packed without thinking. Inside were letters from David written 40 years ago during a brief separation. "My darling Barbara," one read, "Anger makes us do things we regret. I know you want to prove you're right, but proving you're right won't make either of us happy." Another said, "Revenge never makes anyone happy, but justice is worth pursuing. There's a difference between making them pay and making things right." The words hit me with the force of his living voice. I drove to Riverside Cemetery. I sat by his grave under the old oak tree and traced his name on the cold granite. "What would you do, David?" I whispered. The answer wasn't in the wind. It was in my memory of him. "You've already won, Barbara." I could almost hear him say, "They know they underestimated you, but destroying them won't bring our home back. You're a builder, not a destroyer. Make things right." That evening, I opened my laptop. I wasn't planning another attack. I was designing a solution David would have been proud of. The next morning, I was at the Chicago Police Bureau, sitting across from a sharp, nonsense detective named Ryan Foster. I laid out everything: the evidence of financial fraud, the tax documents I'd memorized, the documentation of my own investments in the house. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have sufficient evidence for criminal charges here," he said, studying the details. "Financial fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. I want justice through proper legal channels," I told him. "Not personal revenge." He raised an eyebrow. "Most people in your situation would be screaming for blood. My husband taught me the difference." By 11, arrest warrants were issued for Thomas Hayes. At 1, we were in an emergency court hearing. My attorney, Lisa Morgan, presented my case to Judge Williams. Mrs. Mitchell invested over $23,000 in documented improvements to this residence over the past 5 years, Morgan explained. handing over a stack of receipts and contractor invoices. She has legal standing as a property co. The judge examined the evidence. Her decision was swift. The house is returned to the rightful owner. Defendants must vacate the premises within 48 hours. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, the sound of a perfectly engineered solution clicking into place. By 3, the eviction notice was served. I watched from my car across the street as a sheriff's deputy handed the court order to Patricia Hayes. Her face crumpled through the familiar stages of shock, anger, and desperation. But this time, she was facing the full weight of the law, not just one wronged woman. Brandon emerged from the house, my house, carrying a suitcase, his movements robotic. Jessica followed, her face hollow. They loaded their car in silence. No arguments, no threats, just the quiet, heavy acceptance of people who had finally met a consequence they couldn't intimidate or charm their way out of. At 5, I stood in my own doorway. A locksmith had already changed the locks. The house felt different, not because they had changed it, but because they had left signs of their hasty departure. Dirty dishes in the sink, magazines scattered on the coffee table. They had treated my home like a temporary hotel, never understanding they were occupying someone else's life. I spent the rest of the day systematically erasing their presence. It wasn't an act of anger, but of restoration. I cleaned the counters, vacuumed the floors, and bought a fresh bouquet of yellow daffodils for David's crystal vase. The house was starting to remember who it belonged to. At 3 the next day, my phone rang. Brandon's number. Mom. His voice was a thin, broken thing. Can we talk? I remembered David's lesson about the difference between justice and cruelty. We're talking. I realized I was wrong. He stammered. Everything's falling apart. Jessica's drinking again. The Hayes blamed me for Thomas's arrest. I lost my job. The words tumbled out, a litany of self-inflicted wounds. I'm sorry to hear that, Brandon. Are you really? The question was raw, honest. I thought for a moment. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. I'm sorry it came to this. Mom, forgive me, please, he whispered. I know I hurt you, but I'm still your son. The silence stretched between us. Brandon, forgiveness is one thing. Trust is entirely different. You made your choice when you threw me out of my own home. Now you have to live with it. I can't survive without my money, I finished gently. You survived 34 years learning to depend on me. Now it's time to learn to depend on yourself. Mom, please. I spent 30 years giving you everything, I said, my voice steady, my time, my money, my heart, and the first moment it became convenient, you discarded all of it. Goodbye, Brandon. I hung up the phone. That evening, I poured myself a glass of good wine and sat in David's favorite chair. The house felt quiet, solid. It was mine again, not just legally, but morally. Justice had prevailed. The systematic opponent had become something better, a woman who understood the difference between winning and being right. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.